it's time to reflect on one of the most famous comedy partnerships in film history. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy's run of more than 100 screen comedies from the 1920s to 1951. They became a screen duo in the silent era at Hal Roach Studios in 1926 when they began working together, often portraying bumbling work colleagues or housemates. While the musician, broadcaster and silent film expert Neil Brand is touring a new theatre show to celebrate their remarkable talent, playing live accompaniment to clips of their films and discussing the secret of their art, and he's here now at the front row keyboard to live accompany me through a classic scene. This is from the 1929 Laurel and Hardy's silent film Angora Love. Music please, maestro. A goat, yes, a goat, has followed Stan home, and the boys can't get rid of it. They realise that the goat smells. So they have to bathe the goat while the landlord is coming up the stairs. And as he comes through the door, they try to hide the goat under the bed. We won't spoil the ending. Thank you so much, Neil. And also with us, I'm delighted to say, is film historian Pamela Hutchinson, another expert in Laurel and Hardy and silent film. Let's first remind ourselves of one of Laurel and Hardy's talkies. This is from Dirty Work from 1933, trying to sweep a chimney with a brush and a shotgun with catastrophically sooty results.
Did you find something?
Yeah, it'll be up in a minute.
Good. Now one more push, and we've got it.
Oh, I don't know what to say. How do you backhand announce a clip like that, Neil? Neil, you're doing this nationwide tour about Laurel and Hardy, and you're featuring clips from their films. Why are they still such a draw?
I think because the comedy is very simple. There's something really lovely about watching something disastrous about to happen, and that's what's so clever with them. They set up the gag a good few seconds before it happens, so that you're gripped by the fact that it's about to happen, and then when it does, a little bit like Hitchcock, you know, the suspense isn't in the shot, it's in waiting for the shot. With Laurel and Hardy, they will do exactly what you think they're going to do, but not when you think it's going to happen, and it won't be the first thing they do. They'll do something else in the way. They're brilliant slapstick kind of creations.
Yeah. Pamela, the peg for Neil's tour is 100 years since they became a kind of formal duo. Can you give us a sense of how far they were solo stars before then and their style had developed?
Oh, they came from very different places. You know, Stan Laurel came from Northern England and from the stage, and he was following his father into the musical and working in the UK stage. He joined Fred Karno's famous troupe and was basically understudy to Charlie Chaplin. When he came over to do a US tour, lots of people left to go to Hollywood, and he didn't. Neither did he go home. He carried on doing vaudeville in America, so he was stage-honed by the time he started making silent films in the sort of early mid-20s. Mm. And when he does, he's making parodies of big hits, so he has this slightly sideways look, whereas Oliver Hardy, born in the south of the US, in Georgia, and he ran his own cinema, and he watched the films, and he said, I could do better. So he joins a studio, works his way up, comes to Hollywood and starts playing comedy parts, but basically a heavy. Like, the sweetest role he had really was as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, but more or less he plays the thug well.
So it's interesting. Can you both pin down the dynamics of how their partnership came to be on and off screen? How did it work? Do you want to go first, Pamela?
Well, I think at first you think you have this kind of wimpy guy and you have this big tough guy, so they should be enemies, they should be antagonists. Oliver Hardy should be bullying Stan Laurel, but that isn't funny. The funny thing is to put them together with the same aim and still pulling in different directions. So they have to be united in one purpose, but completely at odds in every other regard.
Yeah. And it's the Hal Roach Studios at the moment they're properly put together, although I think you identified they'd worked together once before, hadn't they?
They'd worked together in 1921 when Stan was a solo performer, and he'd hired Ollie to come in and be a thug, as Pamela says. And they did it very, very well together. You could see their timing is immaculate, even though they hadn't worked together before. They become a proper partnership in 27, but a reason I think 26 is important is because they start to learn, as Pamela says, all the various ins and outs of the way Hal Roach wanted to make his films. Stan said, Ollie made me laugh and I could do everything else. And so the basis of the relationship really is that Ollie is there to do what Ollie does, and Stan then creates these wonderful castles of comedy for the two of them to work in.
And I was wondering if there's a film from that silent era that stands out for illustrating their skill. And I was thinking, having seen a preview of your show, Neil, there's an epic pie fight in one of their films with...
In Battle of the Century.
It starts with one pie being thrown, but it escalates into tens of thousands of pies.
It does, and I love is that that gives me the chance as a piano player to actually kind of choreograph that.
Because you're obviously doing the live accompaniment.
Absolutely, and I'm making it up every night as well. So you do get that with the first pie, and then the slow move towards the next pie. And eventually, the way it builds is so beautifully done. It's something like a 10-minute sequence. They threw up to 40,000 pies. We don't know for sure, but we do know that it took all afternoon to shoot. It was a hot day, and by the end of the time they were shooting it, those pies had begun to really ronk. So I think they probably got to the stage where they go, right, we're not doing it anymore now. Everybody was covered in cream. But the reason they did it in the first place was because Stan Laurel hated the fact that pie throwing was such a cliche of old slapstick, and he wanted to make a film which meant that they would never use pies ever again. So he said, right, we're going to close this down now by doing the biggest pie fight we can.
I've got to ask, because your show involves you improvising music to some of these silent films, does it feel in a way like you're collaborating with them?
Very much so. I try to think like them, and I try to fit around them like choreography. But I have to say the big influence for me has been Tom and Jerry, because the Tom and Jerry cartoons did exactly that. And the way that the music kind of, it partially drives things, but it also surrounds it. It's like painting a beautiful picture in which you've already got the outline. That's the fun bit for me.
Speaking of painting beautiful pictures, you've chosen a favourite film, which I think is one of the more familiar ones of theirs, Pamela. It's a talkie. Tell us about it.
I feel that, I'm a huge fan of silent Laurel and Hardy. It's probably my first love, but we have to talk about Way Out West, the sort of Western parody, which goes back to, Stan Laurel's original movies. And this is the film in which you get to hear them sing The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. And what they do with a song is escalate the humour and the surprises just in the same way that they escalate a pie fight, really.
Okay, let's have a listen.
In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, on the trail of the lonesome pine, in the pale moonshine, our hearts entwine, where she carved her name and I carved mine. Oh June, just like the mountains are blue. Like
What's so lovely is I can see in my mind's eye the way that they dance around each other, like one of them is a lady lifting their coattails. I'm interested in how easy or hard their transition was into the sound era, because I'm so familiar with the sound films, I was less familiar with the silent work. Was something lost, do you think, or did they do it seamlessly?
Compared to many silent stars and a lot of silent comedians, their transition to sound was impeccable. They did really, really well. I do slightly prefer the silent films, and I think that sometimes in the sound films there's more space to develop character, but they do sometimes get bogged down in situation. The silent films, as Neil was suggesting, anything can happen, and the escalation and the whimsy can go in any direction. So there's many great moments in the sound films, but they didn't lose much, but they did lose a little bit of their surprise.
Well, I was thinking there is a silent film that you showed extract of in your show, Neil, when I know it's hard to believe, a bit like the pie fight, but it's they're all ripping each other's trousers off.
Yeah, it's about 35 chaps ripping each other's trousers.
Which makes sense if you watch the film. And you brilliantly get the audience to create sound effects of the ripping. And I realised, given how many times I was trying to rip the same piece of paper, how long that sequence goes on for, which works in silent comedy but wouldn't with dialogue. So how does the film comedy change?
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, I think it is, as Pamela says, what they were doing with silent comedy was filling the space with as much action as possible. Once they start in on dialogue begins to take over the comedy itself. And so you don't get these big, particularly these big kind of set pieces like you'd have with Jordan Tooten, with that one, for instance. And also, I think that an audience likes the idea of playing along. That's why I introduced the idea of the trouser ripping, because they now get the chance to be Laurel and Hardy. And I know people sit there holding their bit of paper. There we go.
Honestly.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm going to go and change these now.
Sorry, I was going to say you could continue. I was just adding a sound effect to your answer. I was actually going to ask you as well, Neil, what happened when silent films ended to all the pianists?
Well, it was a literal tragedy. It's very hard to know for sure because there isn't the paperwork, and I don't think the research has really been done, but I think it's quite feasible that in the UK alone, up to 55,000 people lost their jobs within 2 years. And I do know that there were an awful lot of people who come up to me and say, oh, my grandmother did it, my great-grandfather did it, and in many cases put the instruments away and never touched them again. It was a very specific job, and one that people took real pride in, and also were paid very well because it was a long night.
Yeah.
You were doing 2 shows or 3 shows. And so when that disappeared, there was also a sense, I think, of a locality that was lost. People would go to the cinema because they knew the band, they knew the piano player.
Right.
And all that goes, and it's a whole new world.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Pamela, you're one of the people like Neil keeping the spirit of silent cinema alive, and I get a sense there's a huge following. What have you noticed about audiences who come to see silent film now and things like Laurel and Hardy?
Well, I mean, Laurel and Hardy do have this sort of instantaneous impact on people. You know, immediately you start to see their faces. People almost laugh before they've completed their first joke. Yeah. But the music does make it into this special kind of collective live event. Like, there's only one goat, and it smells just in this one room. You know, you can never rip that pair of trousers again. You know.
Oh, so I think you can. Actually,
oh, well, you can. But it's never the same pair of trousers, Samira, that's the point.
No. Yes.
So I think, you know, it feels interactive in that way because you know that somewhere in the room, someone is looking up at the screen and saying, how many goats? Mm-hmm. And, you know, how many custard pies? You're all in this kind of horror of the escalating joke together because some of their best slapstick is, as I think Neil suggested, slightly stressful. You think, how many cars can get damaged in this traffic jam? You know, how bad is this situation going to get? And you are at least supported with a crowd through the agony of watching Laurel and Hardy.
Absolutely.
There is another plus about it being silent, is that you're not going to lose the next line because you're laughing so loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
People in dialogue films are going, oh, I don't know what they're going to say, they're going to say. With this, you just hear rolls of laughter.
I know, I thought it actually works really well in the TikTok era. And also, we don't have time to talk about it, but you point out wonderfully how, you know, Eric and Ernie, Morecambe and Wise, the 2 guys sharing a bed, it only works because of Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah, they only do it because of Laurel and Hardy.
Oh, thank you so much, Pamela Hutchinson and Neil Brand. Neil Brand presents 100 Years of Laurel and Hardy, starts in Wareham on Sunday and continues touring till mid-May. I now have to try and read my next script, which I've ripped up into 3 pieces, but I will try. Patrick Charnley was a successful lawyer, and one night at home, he collapsed